There's a moment very early in Joe Dante's commentary for his film Inner Space. It's a scene where Martin Short is going to see a doctor, and Dante looks at the screen. Well, I presume he's looking at the screen. And he says, "That's William Shallert. I hired him because he's in a bunch of 50s B movies as a doctor. So I hired him to play the doctor here." There's a slight pause, and then he says, "I don't expect anyone to get that but me." And I think it's the perfect distillation of Joe Dante's entire ethos of making movies. His entire film body of work is an inside joke to himself. So Joe Dante started under the Roger Corman machine. He was a trailer editor. He actually edited the American trailer for movies like Amarcord, the Fellini movie. He and his editing partner, Alan Arkash, were given the assignment to create a movie out of essentially leftover bits from other Roger Corman movies. So for $50,000, they made Hollywood Boulevard. About half the movie is just reused footage from other films, and the other half is new footage that they shot about a girl trying to make it in Hollywood, essentially joining a Roger Corman-like machine. As I said, it cost $50,000, and it made $1 million at the box office. I mean, that's the Roger Corman recipe for success right there. Keeping costs super low, making something passable, selling it well, making the profit, and moving on to the next movie. And that started his career. He's one of many actually surprisingly prominent filmmakers who started under the Roger Corman machine. Martin Scorsese's first sustained feature film production was under Roger Corman. It was Boxcar Bertha. Jonathan Demme started there. Ron Howard's directing career started there. And it's like, it was a real machine that fostered talent if you could survive under it. And Dante survived. He went on and made Piranha, a Jaws ripoff that is sort of a comedy. I don't think it's very funny, but it's like it's there. And he was able to build that into an actual career. And so from there, he made The Howling, which gained the attention of Steven Spielberg, and then Steven Spielberg became his producer for essentially a decade. There were a couple of movies in there that Spielberg didn't produce, and suddenly Joe Dante is on easy track. You get Steven Spielberg to produce your movie in the 80s and you are set. It's like, that is how you make it in Hollywood at that time. And I see there's a parallel with another filmmaker that I think is really illuminating. So Joe Dante and Robert Zemeckis actually have very similar starts. Dante started under Corman, but Zemeckis actually started under Spielberg. He barged himself into Spielberg's office with a student film. Spielberg was impressed. Spielberg put him in contact with the head of production at Columbia, and Columbia produced his first couple of movies, especially Used Cars. Used Cars is kind of like the big one from that era that holds a special place in my heart. But the important thing is the professional relationship that Zemeckis formed with Spielberg. The relationship that Zemeckis and Spielberg had was significantly closer than what Dante and Spielberg had. Zemeckis and Spielberg describe it as a mentorship. They're actually not that different in age. I think it's less than 5 years. But Spielberg was well established when Zemeckis barged into that office, and it became a mentorship. Whereas Dante is more of just kind of a generalized producing partner, with Spielberg. And but we have this very similar path where they start with these very manic, kind of insane, grungy little films that are just out there to entertain, and then Spielberg kind of softens the edges and refines them a bit, and then they kind of go off on their own direction. Dante never, some of the edges were definitely sanded off. A lot of it has to do with who he was working with. He was very Corman-esque in terms of trying to attract talent around him to overcome his own deficiencies. But Zemeckis always had that writing partner in Bob Gale through the first about 15 years of his career. And, you reach the late 80s and early 90s with the Back to the Future trilogy, and suddenly Zemeckis says, I'm going to become serious, and I'm going to go make things like Castaway and Forrest Gump. Dante never did that, because Dante loved his inside jokes. Joe Dante is just a big kid who got to make movies for decades. I don't say that derisively. I don't say it derisively at all. I say that with affection, because Joe Dante is a special talent. He's a special voice. And I think the problem that he faced professionally is that no one in power in Hollywood understood him. I don't think Spielberg understood him. I don't think Ron Howard understood him. I don't think anyone understood him. I don't think they understood how to actually take advantage of his anarchic view of cinema. And so, looking through his career, you have to think of stuff like Piranha. So Piranha it's a Jaws ripoff, but done with a comic style. And it wasn't originally intended to be so. When Corman kind of gathered the funds for it, the original idea was that it would be more of a serious movie, that it would be more of a straight horror movie. But Dante was looking at the production, he was looking at the script, and I assume he was building the little puppets that were going to be the Piranha on screen, and he realized none of this is actually scary. I got to try to make it funny instead. And it just feeds into that immediate motif that is common throughout his films of small things gathering in packs with anarchic results against normal people. And it's that first kind of pure distillation of him where it's just, we're going to go. My problem with it is that I don't think the script by John Sayles is particularly funny. I don't think it's particularly good. I don't think John Sayles is a particularly good writer. I know he became a director later, but I kind of don't like his movies. But that's another thing. And then, through The Howling, he's gaining technical efficiencies. He's gaining technical knowledge, and he's gaining a better cadre of technical resources around him, and he's gaining an actor stable that he can pull from. The big example is always going to be Dick Miller, who is in almost every single one of his films. And he's building this, and he's building a reputation, and then he latches onto Spielberg, or Spielberg latches onto him to make Gremlins. And if you told most people that Steven Spielberg directed Gremlins, most people would be open to believing you, because it actually kind of feels like a Spielberg movie. It feels like something between a Frank Capra movie, a Steven Spielberg movie, and by the end, a Joe Dante movie. And this is also the time period where Steven Spielberg was making something like 1943, which is full of its own manic energy, which was co-written by Robert Zemeckis, Bob Gale, and even John Milius, which kind of creates this manic sense of energy towards the end that Spielberg largely doesn't have. But that fitting with the ending of Gremlins, and you're suddenly thinking this is sort of the same time period. Okay, maybe Spielberg did direct this, but no, it was very much a director for hire job on the part of Dante. But Dante was also given enough room to really kind of pursue his comic sensibilities, especially towards the end. The long sequence in the bar, that's just Gremlins being crazy. That's pure Dante. But it's done within this story that is very, very Spielberg. So this is where Dante is being refined. And the 80s is largely the story of his refinement. It's him taking what he knows, what he wants to do, and trying to make it better as it goes along. So you have movies like Explorers, Explorers is a story of studio interference. The last act is weird, and I don't think it quite works. But that first, like, 2/3 or so, as the boys gather together to, take this alien knowledge and build a spaceship out of it, it's like, it almost feels Spielberg-esque, and Spielberg had nothing to do with it. This is Joe Dante taking his collaborators that he's bringing with him from production to production. This is Joe Dante using the lessons he's learning from movie to movie and applying them. And that first 2/3 or so of Explorers is really wonderful. It's really wonderful. Again, the last third is weird, and I don't think it entirely works. I don't think it's a disaster, but it's like it goes pure Dante in this weird direction and this weird package. It doesn't really quite work. But then you also have something like Inner Space, where Inner Space is very obviously Joe Dante trying to go corporate. It's Joe Dante trying to make a movie that will sell. And, Spielberg produced it, but Spielberg's name is barely in the credits. At the start of Gremlins, it says Steven Spielberg presents Gremlins. And on Inner Space, he's towards the end of the credits, and it's produced by Steven Spielberg. His name is not on top of the title. This is very much a Joe Dante film. And, it's full of visual effects toys, it's full of visual effects marvels, and it has, again, those lessons that he's learning from Spielberg applied. So you look at the stories from Piranha and The Howling, and they don't really have that sort of warm, inviting core that is very central to how Spielberg told his stories. But then you get to Inner Space, and you do have that warmth. You have Dennis Quaid having to grow as a character. You have Meg Ryan as the woman in between who has to, kind of like overcome her objections to both men. And it's heartwarming by the end, but it's still distinctly Dante as well, with like the manic energy, especially around the cowboy character. He's a wonderful creation. And then Warner Brothers needed a Gremlins sequel. Warner Brothers had been trying to make a Gremlins sequel for years. They could not make it work. They didn't understand it. And they eventually went back to Dante and said, fine, make a sequel. We'll give you any amount of money. You can do whatever you want. And this is Dante off the hook. This is pure Dante. This is Dante with a blank check. And it's Gremlins 2. And it shits all over the first one. And it is pure anarchic Looney Tunes energy, especially the last half of it, where it's just this manic drive of gremlin action all over the place. This is pure Dante. I don't think it's his best movie. Most people think the Gremlins movies are his best. I don't think it's there. I think it's held back by the fact that it doesn't really have much of an emotional core. It's sort of there. The relationship between Phoebe Cates and Zach Galligan is fine. But it's not like Dennis Quaid and Meg Ryan in Inner Space. It's not, and so I find it kind of an empty exercise in anarchic comedy, and I enjoy that. It's really fun. I really like it, and it is kind of it is Joe Dante at his purest. Again, I don't think it's his best. I think his best is his next movie. It's Matinee. Now, Matinee is the closest he got to trying to be a serious filmmaker. It's not a serious film, but it is a film with a real idea and heart at the core of it. It's the story of a young boy. He has no friends. He's living in Key West, and he's new at the school, and his only real escape from reality is the movies, especially the movies made by John Goodman's character, who's based on William Castle. It's this plea for the movies to just be an entertainment, to not be serious, to be an escape, because that's all that the movies ever were for Dante. His favorite movies are the 50s schlock. They were always, communism is everywhere, and this is a very thinly veiled aspect of the Cold War, but Dante never cared. What he cared about was the monsters, What he cared about was the thrills. And what John Goodman's character brings everyone is just that sigh of relief in the middle of something terrible. So it's set during the Cuban Missile Crisis, as John Goodman's character brings his newest movie, Mant, to Key West. And he just takes advantage of the situation and kind of heightens the rabid fear around everything to get people into Mant, because in Mant, in the theater, you're safe. You know, you can forget that 90 miles away, the Soviet Union is putting nuclear missiles on Cuba. You can just forget for 90 minutes. And you know what? You can walk out and, you know, the world will have ended or it won't, and that's the end of it. And, you know, you'll have that respite. You'll be able to forget your worries. And that is the ultimate distillation of the idea behind Joe Dante's entire body of work. He's not there to preach. You know, he's not there to try to force you to think of something. He's just there to entertain. He just wants people to have fun at his movies. You know, you think back to like Sullivan's Travels. If there's a movie that Dante had nothing to do with, that probably distills everything that he is as a filmmaker as well, it's Sullivan's Travels, Preston Sturges' movie, about a filmmaker who wants to make a movie called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? You know, and it's supposed to be serious and everything, and you know, he goes on this adventure to try to find reality, but then he ends up in a prison camp in the bayou, and all of his prisoners who are beset by awfulness are just laughing at silly cartoons. And he realizes that silly movies, that just a laugh is worth so much more than, you know, trying to teach a lesson through film. That, you know, film is ultimately an entertainment, and that's what we need. And you know what? I really appreciate that. I don't love everything Dante made. You know, I have problems with a lot of his movies. You know, nothing to like kill the movies, but like The Burbs, you know, the ending to The Burbs is just a complete mess. You know, it wants its cake and eats it too, about, you know, the central mystery at it all. But it's like, it's still just trying to entertain you the entire time. And a lot of this has to do, and a lot of the relative success or not of each individual movie has a lot to do with his individual writers. I kind of wish he had latched onto Charles Haas longer. Haas wrote 2 of his movies, and he wrote Matinee. And Matinee is, I think, his best movie. It's his best written movie. And if Dante had had a writing partner consistently, a writing partner of that caliber consistently, like how Zemeckis had Bob Gale for the first 15 years of his career, I really think Dante would have reached more consistent artistic success. I really like Dante's work. You know, I'll do my rankings in a bit, but I don't have major problems with Dante as an artist. I think he understood very easily that he had his own deficiencies, that he had his own focuses, and that he really needed companions around him to help him tell stories at the highest levels. And I just really wish that, you know, the best writer that he worked with, who was Haas, would have, you know, stuck with him for years and years and years, and they would have just made movie after movie after movie. You know, those core relationships end up being really important across, within this collaborative medium across the years. I believe Haas was said to be writing what was going to be Dante's next movie, which is another adaptation of The Little Shop of Horrors, or another remake of The Little Shop of Horrors. Roger Corman had greenlit it, but then Roger Corman died a couple of months later, and I have not heard anything about it since. I kind of suspect it's not happening. I wish it did. I wish it will happen, because you know what? I want another Joe Dante movie. However, Joe Dante's career really faltered. The 90s were not kind to him. Matinee was a bomb. Looney Tunes Back in Action was a bomb. Small Soldiers was a modest success financially, but I genuinely don't think it's very good. It reflects a lot of the issues I have with very early Dante, where people just kind of sit around and wait for the plot to happen, and I just don't find it that compelling. But it does have these flashes of of a lot of fun, especially from Phil Hartman. Him just having an off-color line off to the side, talking about how World War II is his favorite war, just cracks me up.
I think World War II was my favorite war.
It's just one small moment in a movie that I find kind of largely inert and kind of unfortunately corporate from Dante. Dante kind of needs to be let loose, and Small Soldiers feels like him very chained down, and I really don't appreciate that. I don't hate everything in his late career. I find Bearing the X to be a small joy. I know Red Letter Media did their ranking, and Bearing the X was near the bottom. I think Bearing the X is somewhere near the middle. I find it charming. It's not very Dante-esque, but I think it's a charming little movie. And his career is just largely filtered out. The Hole was an effort at 3D filmmaking. It's not terrible, but it's not good, and it's not a surprise that it bombed horribly, because it's kind of a nothing little horror movie. And that was the end of his directing career. You listen to him interview, and he interviews a lot, and he's always talking in ways that make him sound like he's ready for another movie, that he wants to make another movie. And this is another instance where I am shocked no one has thrown money at him. Again, we live in an era where Netflix spends $350 million on the electric state so it can dominate their top 10 movies for a week and then fall off. Where's the $20 million for Joe Dante to make something? They're going to bank at Gremlins 3. That's recently been announced. But Chris Columbus is going to make it, not Joe Dante. I mean, sure. I mean, the first Gremlins kind of feels like a Chris Columbus movie. There's another career parallel to explore. But it's like the secret sauce of the whole Gremlins franchise really is Dante himself. Dante's manic anarchism, which dominates the last act of the first movie and kind of dominates everything about the second, is what people love about it. And do we need kind of a softer, nicer Gremlins 3? Or do we need Joe Dante to be let loose again? And I think that's what it needs. Bring back Joe Dante. Or, why didn't Amazon and MGM fill in the gap for Roger Corman after he died and fund Little Shop of Horrors? You spend $5 million or whatever on another Little Shop of Horrors directed by Joe Dante. Yeah, that's something. It's where are these streaming companies? Why aren't they taking some of the most underappreciated voices who actually have solid fan bases these days and giving them a fraction of what they're giving the Russo brothers to make CGI nonsense at scale, and just give a fraction of that to Joe Dante to make something? I want another Joe Dante movie, and I don't think I'm ever going to get it, because no one understands him. A studio saying we need another Gremlins movie and saying we don't want Joe Dante involved is a studio that does not understand Joe Dante at all. And I don't think Joe Dante is that hard to understand. I imagine it's hard to understand for studio executives in meetings. It's we don't understand what you're trying to do to this. How does this deal with the 4 quadrants? How does this work into the algorithm that is going to be HBO Max or whatever? I can understand the issues with that conversation. But when you're willing to throw $350 million at the freaking electric state, for 1 week in your top 10 for it to be forgotten forever, what is the difference between that and giving $20 million to Joe Dante to make something? It's I don't get it. Netflix greenlights everything. Is it just that Joe Dante is going into these meetings saying, I'm going to have a bunch of little critters who are going to be crazy for 2 hours, and there's going to be no real point to it, and the studios are saying, well, there needs to be a point. Why did we have a meeting with Joe Dante? I don't know. I want Joe Dante to make another movie. So, you know, his career is somewhat uneven. I think his height really is Matinee. I think it's an absolutely wonderful movie. I think when he goes corporate and is kind of given the space to do it with something like Inner Space, I think he works really well. But again, you have these instances where anyone produces him other than Steven Spielberg or Ron Howard, and like they don't understand him. Yeah, and even Spielberg, I don't think understands him that well. I think he trusts him. You know, Spielberg produced 3 of his films. He produced Gremlins, he produced Inner Space, and he produced Gremlins 2, and he trusted him enough to kind of do what he wanted on Inner Space and Gremlins 2. And I think that's a testament to Spielberg. You know, Spielberg is not as big a producer now as he was then. So I'm not looking at Spielberg to save his career or anything. But the number of people who actually understood him seems very small, and then the number of people who trust him even though they don't seem to understand him that well are like even smaller. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I don't think he ever grew up. You know, it's like he's going to make another movie. If he's going to make another movie, it's going to be something that like he made in the 80s. You know, he hasn't grown up. He's not going to make a Castaway. He's not going to make a Forrest Gump. If he makes something like a Beowulf, to continue the Robert Zemeckis thing, it's going to be insane, and Grendel is going to be 1,000 little guys who's going to try to beat up Beowulf. You know, it's not the same thing, and it's unfortunate that, you know, he yearns to entertain. He yearns to make the kind of movie that will sell tickets. But he's surprisingly unique. You know, it's not just the little guys, you know, ganging up on everything. That's just kind of a motif for his overall approach to just comedy and film, which is just like manic energy. You know, it's easy to capture that manic energy when you have Rick Baker making 100 different kinds of gremlin puppets, and they're all doing different things, and there's no real reason to it because who cares? They're gremlins. You know, it's that Key and Peele sketch, man. Perfect. But it's not just everything to him, because, you know, again, Matinee is a perfect fit, and there's nothing like that. You know, the central monster, which is within the movie, is just one man turning into an ant, but the overall approach to comedy is still the same as things break down during the screening. It's that sort of energy. And the fact that Matinee was a box office bomb is one of my great tragedies. I think I was about 6 years old when it was released, so I don't think I can be blamed for it, but I wish I had gone in theaters, even at 6 years old. So Dad, Mom, why didn't you take me to go see Matinee? And so that's the career of Joe Dante. It's, you know, it started in Corman. He actually really tried to grow. It wasn't just gathering quality collaborators around him, which was part of it. It was also, you know, actually trying to grow as an artist himself, especially on the technical side, and still preserving his own sense of comedy and horror, and, you know, trying to bring that to the live screen. So, you know, even when you do get to something like Looney Tunes Back in Action, as much of a misfire as it is, it's still distinctively his in certain moments. It's a deeply compromised work. It doesn't work, but, you know, you can still feel like Dante's like trying to make something that's his. And it's not just that final perfect combination of Joe Dante working directly with Looney Tunes, which gets completely squandered. It's his approach to bringing it all to the screen. You know, he was a unique voice. I want him to make another movie. And I feel like he is the kind of voice that has mass appeal. You know, people love Gremlins. Gremlins 2 actually has a bit of a cult following. And I think if people gave Matinee a chance, they would end up loving it. I really feel like there is this ability to connect with the masses there that really ends up being a failure on the part of the studios, who just don't know how to sell it, who don't know how to package it, who don't know, like, just how to process it, even in the concept stage. And, much like Terry Gilliam, he has these fights with these producers, and things kind of go off the rails of things like Explorers and Looney Tunes Back in Action, which are deeply unfortunate, which mar his career. But I really feel like Joe Dante is special. He's not one of the great filmmakers. He's not. He's too undisciplined. He's too inconsistent. He really needed a stable of, especially writers, to really kind of hone him, which he never got. And at the same time, I just find him wonderfully entertaining and just a fun voice in cinema that I kind of wish I just got more of. I don't need him chasing trends. I need him given a blank check, a small blank check. I don't want him given $350 million. I want him given a small blank check to make one more movie. So please, Amazon, Netflix, someone, throw some pocket change at him and let him make The Little Shop of Horrors. Fire Chris Columbus and let him make Gremlins 3. Do something. All right? It's just, bring him back. I want another Joe Dante movie. So please, do it. That being said, that's Joe Dante. I'm a fan. He's got a special place in my heart, and you know what? If you see this, Mr. Dante, thank you so much for the good times at the movies. I appreciate it. I really do.